Welcome, everyone, to another broadcast of The Soul of the Everyman on the ArtistFirst radio network. All past shows are podcasts. You can find them at ArtistFirst.com. We welcome your email questions and comments. Hit us up at dj@ArtistFirst.com. And now here they are, Michael and Margaret Lyons.
And thank you very much, Z-Man. And thank you, as always, for suffering along with us.
All righty then.
All righty. And I am Michael Lyons.
And I am Margaret.
She's the long-suffering Margaret. You do need a lot of patience to put up with me.
I think any human being you're going to need patience to put up with.
Well, I'm glad you ended it that way. That any human being would need a lot of patience to put up with you, is the way I would have put it.
I'm not that easy, honey.
True. Hey, but tonight we will be talking about, in some aspects, suffering. And before you guys reach for the dial, I can hear them now. Just got to turn this off. I don't want to hear about suffering. We're going to talk about how you end suffering, or how suffering has a limit, and more than just a limit, it has a purpose. And it's not the purpose that many people may have in their minds when they think about, well, the purpose of suffering, I have to, everyone has their turn in the barrel, and, you get through it, and maybe it makes you wiser or whatever. Yes, these things are true. And as the Buddha noted, all life is suffering. And, it sounds like a downer.
The ultimate downer.
Sounds like a downer.
Like, why am I here?
Like, why am I here? It sounds nihilistic.
Yes.
It sounds, it sounds like the Buddha needed a little, some SSRIs or something, some Zoloft. But it's not, this is not where he went, and not where, let's say, the modern Buddhist or Zen thought has gone with suffering. The realization that all life is suffering has an inner and deeper truth. We're not going to go into that tonight. Tonight we're going to talk about our buddy and yours, Eckhart Tolle, because we love Eckhart. He's the best. And he has a lovely quote, and before I just go on and on, long suffering, I'm going to hand it over to Margaret to read us the quote.
All righty. Is suffering really necessary? Yes and no. If you had not suffered as you have, there would be no depth to you as a human being, no humility, no compassion. You would not be reading this now. Suffering cracks open the shell of ego, and then comes a point when it has served its purpose. Suffering is necessary until you realize it is unnecessary. Eckhart Tolle.
Indeed. And I think that, the kernel of what he's talking about there is really in those last couple of lines. But it requires some framing and some definition of terms. But once you have that, and we'll go into that a little bit, but once you have that, the one thing you take away without even any amount of thought about this concept is that in some essential way, all of us, you, me, everyone, we create our own suffering. When you realize that, you realize that there's anything you create, you have some control over. Suffering is something which a lot of people think of as being sort of out of their control. It just comes, and I'm no more than a pawn in some great, terrible game where I'm made to suffer. And that's the sort of the operative phrase, Margaret, is this: I'm being made to suffer. If it were up to me, I would never suffer. But the me that is making that statement excuse me, the me that is making that statement is the little me, the ego me, the me that says I don't like this or I do like this. And one of the great realizations of Buddhism and of Zen and of Tolle and many, many other philosophers is that me thrives, is part and parcel of suffering. It is in many ways the root of suffering.
Right. Just the question that he starts out with, is suffering really necessary? Now, how many times have you heard this question? How many variations of this question has there been? Have you come across people just throwing their hands up like, is this really necessary? Is this suffering really necessary? And if you think about it, who is asking the question? Because most people think, oh, well, I'm asking the question. It's like, no, who are you really that is asking this question? And they look at you like you're crazy.
Mm-hmm.
But what part of you is actually suffering through this? And most people would say, oh, no, well, it's me. It's my, this situation, it's me. How I feel about it. And that's when you take it a half step further and just ask, do you really want to know?
Well, it's the why me and the converse answer. Why not you? And that's what people don't want to hear.
Well, exactly. It's is this suffering necessary? And I think I've told the story about being in the pediatric cancer wards in Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York City. And we had a roommate who it was a fresh diagnosis of cancer for the child, and we nothing but sympathy, nothing but compassion for that, because we're in that boat. But they were trying to figure out a way to have somebody with the child while the diagnoses are going on, and they're doing consultations with the doctors to figure it all out, what they're going to do next. And the grandmom was there, and she's just like, oh, you're such a good girl. You're such a good girl. I don't know why this is happening to you. I don't know why this is happening to you. And, you're sitting there going, yes, we get it. But the problem was she kept saying that well into the evening, as if she's expecting someone to just come out and give her the answer. Like your granddaughter did this thing, and that's why this is the repercussions of this action type of thing. And I just, she's your roommate. You hear everything. So I just turned to her and I said, can you tell me why not your granddaughter? She looked at me like I was, what? Gave her a minute for that to sink in, and I looked at her and said, do you think that any of these children on this ward deserve this? And she never talked to me after that.
Well, imagine that. But this, the kernel of that, Ma, is so important, because people kind of gloss that over. The why me, or it's also often phrased as, well, I've been good.
Right.
Why is God punishing me? Or why does God allow suffering? Or why this or why that? And the essential question is in of itself incorrect. It comes from the ego. The ego wants a lot of things, but the ego wants it all to be about what it likes and what it doesn't like. And it wants it to be justified. The ego wants to be right. The phrase "I was right" is directly out of the ego. Because when you're right, they're wrong. And that feeds the egoic self. And when the egoic self can tell itself a story about why this one is suffering, oh, well, they did this and they did that, and because, oh, and they deserve it. This judge.
Somehow, yeah. Well, but the underlying
judgment
attitude of it is control.
Control, and the ego wants to be the judge of who deserves a reward, who deserves a punishment. And of course, the ego is always deserving of reward and never deserving of punishment. So when the ego is afflicted, when something happens, the ego rails. Why me? I didn't do anything wrong. And then it even goes into these recriminations. Well, maybe I did something wrong, and I'm sorry. Just this whole egoic illusion is rocked by any kind of suffering which comes to it. So that's what tolle means. When it's happy times, and the ego can look around and say, I'm right, and those people deserve suffering. Those people deserve suffering, and I know exactly what's going on, and I have it all under control. And it's living high, and then suffering comes, especially what the ego considers unjustified suffering. I've been good. I don't deserve this, but yet it comes anyway. That, as Tolle says in the beginning, that's the purpose of suffering, is to bring the ego to the point where it gets thinner and thinner, and finally it gives in. It cracks. It gives in under the weight of suffering and realizes the question you said to the grandma, and that stops people in their tracks. When they say, why me? And you say, why not you? With the implication of, you're no different from anybody else. Oh, that is like right to the heart of the ego. What do you mean I'm no different from anybody else?
Well, you sit there and you think it's so illogical. They thought for half a moment. Every child on this ward was afflicted, and they did nothing for that affliction, to cause that affliction. And you look at it, it's like, can you think this logically through? Because you know what? You're swimming in deep water now. Your little ego is going to sink in about 10 minutes, because there ain't nothing that's going to save you. There is no response that the ego can give that will help you float through this. So it's like,
And that's, we begin with the beginning of Tolle Ego. Let's go back. Is suffering really necessary? And the answer to the question, that question in and of itself is wrong, but it's an important question, because this is where everyone starts. It's where the ego starts. Why me? Why is this necessary? What justifies my suffering? And then if you're an especially compassionate ego, you say, well, what justifies their suffering? That's the beginning of wisdom, when you start to think, well, maybe their suffering isn't justified either. But in the beginning, the ego is, it's all about me, in the key of me. And as it is all about me, when anything afflicts me that I don't like, whether small or large, the instantaneous ego question is, why me? And then it makes the whole story up. This one had it in for me, and blah, blah, blah.
If you can understand that the minute that question rises, your response to it is, I'm going to make up a story to justify how I'm feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Because this does not fit in my world that I know. So there must be a reason outside of me, because my world I'm very comfortable in. So somebody else is making me uncomfortable.
It's someone else's fault.
Yes. And it's a typical response that you see across the board. Across the board. As if that response is, okay, well, you are to blame for this.
And
What does that actually do to solve the problem?
exactly.
That would be, because it's again, there are too many examples that we had seen. Parents running off trying to find out, oh, this caused my child's cancer. But even if you found out, if that was true, what is that going to do? It's not going to take the cancer away. You must fight now in the battle that's presented to you, not the imaginary battle that you think is a little more comfortable for you to handle.
That's so important. You have to stop there for a second, because people get lost right there.
Mm-hmm.
The battle they lose, what they lose is they say, rather than fight, as you said, the battle that is now, they instantly say, this isn't my fault. This is unjustified. I'm going to find someone to blame, to be responsible, and then I'm going to heap all this on them and say, it's your fault, and you've got to fix it. And you've got to make this right, and you've got to pay. And that battle, that crusade, takes away from the now. And we saw it so many times where parents went off on that crusade, leaving their child broken, suffering, afflicted child to face it on their own. And what would those children do? They would face it on their own.
Yes.
Because they are so close to the ego, or so close to their being, that they don't have that ego framework, or not a big one. And they get past it quick, and they realize, now is when I have to live.
They don't count the ego as more than a like or a dislike. They're in a battle for their lives. Or their lives. And they know it. Regardless of what some people may think. Some adults will say, oh, well, we won't tell him or her anything because, oh, I don't know if they can handle it. It's like, you can't handle it. And you don't have the heart to open your mouth and tell the truth.
But you can't handle it, to them and to yourself.
To yourself and to them. Why does your opinion matter at all? Because it doesn't. You're not the one that is going to be under that blazing light of truth, who's got to handle whatever decisions are coming up.
Well, you went by very quickly, but when you say, that realization, when they're off trying to change the subject and make it about them, make it about their suffering, say, well, we won't tell them, because they can't handle it, when it's really, I can't handle it.
Oh, yeah.
And the ego, I'll say another thing which may disturb some people, but the ego always takes the easy route for itself.
Right. I've got to feel comfortable about this. So it's got to be somebody else's fault. I know I did everything perfectly. I'm a perfect mother.
Yeah, well, that, and the ego is incredibly self-indulgent.
Oh, my Lord, yes.
So when suffering comes, the instantaneous reaction of the ego is, I don't like this, and it's someone else's fault, and I'm going to make them pay. And, for a while, Margaret, that works, but then suffering continues. And in Tolle's phrasing here, suffering doesn't care about whether you like it or not. Not even the slightest bit. Suffering just comes, and in fact, the more you don't like it, in essence, the more you increase your suffering. Everyone knows the fact that if you, that the anticipation of pain can be as bad, if not worse, than the pain itself. That the worry about a situation can be as bad, if not worse, than the situation itself. Well, the ego is all about living in worry, anxiety, in the future, in anticipated pain. And so when you tell the ego, if you want to make the ego suffer, you tell it you're going to die tomorrow. And tomorrow never comes. Every day the ego worries about tomorrow. Every day the ego worries about, what will happen, what could happen. This could happen, that could happen. This one has it in for me, that one has it in for me. This is the worst kind of suffering, because you're not just enduring some sort of physical discomfort or mental discomfort. You're creating your own.
Yeah.
This is self-grown discomfort.
Right. No, you are basically actively looking for points of discomfort for your soul. And we've all been trained to anticipate things in terms of, well, let's take care of that before something worse happens. But when it becomes obsessive, where there really isn't more information that you need to look at or process to make a different decision, but you're making the same considerations, observations, over and over and over again, coming to the same conclusion. It's a waste of energy.
And why do you do that? You do it because the ego says, I don't like this, so do it again.
Well, it's ego control. Because the ego would rather have you do this over and over again than give up control to another part of your consciousness that basically says, okay, we're going to rest now.
Yes.
We're going to be still now. We're going to take in what is happening in this situation and what needs to be done. In many ways, you really have to get to the point where the ego has absolutely nothing to say, because it will impose itself. It will push itself forward every single time if it thinks it has something to say. And it's not that I have a solution, but if it thinks it has something to say, it's going to say it to you, so that it will always have your attention, your control, your consciousness. And you really have to get to a point where the ego itself is in such overwhelm that it has no response. And that's when you start growing. That's the crack that Tolle is talking about, the crack in the ego.
Exactly so. And I want to go back, because you have 3 or 4 wonderful, wonderful points we have to emphasize. So the ego is a constant voice. We're all familiar with it. You know your ego voice. You hear it in your head all the time. It's always saying something. It's always saying something. It never freaking shuts up. And when there's any kind of silence, if you're trying to do a meditation, the ego is going to... So the Buddhists have their discipline to, what do they say? Still the mind. What they're really trying to say is still the little voice, the ego voice. So one way to do it is through great discipline, through the Buddhist way. But another way, which is what Buddha himself and many others have realized, is that suffering brings the ego to a point of shocked, utter silence. It doesn't know what to say, and it shuts up. And in that silence, in that, as you mentioned, suffering cracks open the shell of the ego, in that gap where the ego doesn't have any idea what to say, you suddenly realize that there's more to you, that there's still a you, despite the fact that the ego has finally shut up. That you're still there.
You're still alive.
You're still alive. That you can exist without thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And not only that, but you can exist in the face of great suffering and in acceptance. And that's, the ego rails against acceptance, Margaret. The ego says, what do you mean, you're just going to do nothing? You've heard this in your mind, or you've heard other people say it. What do you mean accept it? You mean you're just going to do nothing? And if you say to the ego, yes, there's nothing to be done, the ego, it just shocks it to its core. You can hear the intake and breath. Nothing. But the acceptance of the situation, the best way to put it is Tolle says you accept the situation, but the situation, the ego thinks of the situation as the past, the future, what could happen, all these things. It's this giant ball of situation. the actual situation is just this particular moment of now. And what Tolle says is you accept, you put the ego to absolute shock silence when you just say, I accept the moment of now. And you can even try it yourself now, sitting there at home listening to this. Just say, I accept the moment of now. And you'll feel this odd kind of, and there'll be a quiet instant. Because during that quiet instant, the ego goes, what? You've accepted the moment of now? And in the moment of now, there is no ego judgment. Because it's just, there's nothing to judge. It's just now. And then in the moment of now, in the acceptance of the moment of now, you can accept anything. You can accept the greatest degree of suffering, the greatest degree of discomfort. Because the moment of now, in its own realization, has a beautiful promise that the next moment will be different. And the ego doesn't understand that. The ego goes, I know all the moments that are coming and all the moments that could come, and I know all the moments that happened, and I know everything that's going to happen. It's going to be terrible. Terrible, I tell you.
Yes, if you live in the moment of now, you realize that anything is possible. Yes, the bad could happen, and the good could happen, and it's okay. That you're not in control.
Oh, and we got there.
What?
We got there. We got there with Christopher. To exactly that phrase. I think I remember you saying it. That anything can happen and it's okay.
Yes.
Because now is good.
Well, it was a day-to-day, moment-to-moment now. Mm-hmm. Now. And you had to actively make the choice every single moment, especially when you were in the hospital, because there are many things going on simultaneously. You are in charge of maintenance of another human body who has now been stricken. So there are many things that you've got to be aware of, as well as the procedures that are going on in the hospital, how that fits in, what the protocols are, and what the dynamic is between the doctors and the doctors with the hospital and the nurses. Very different environment, but it's full immersion, and you can only live it in the now. Projecting forward was not possible because no one actually knew what was going to happen projecting forward. You have your appointment set. That doesn't mean that that's all it is appointment to appointment.
Well, and I think the other attack, if you will, that was always present in that situation was you would have those who would come to you and try to engage you on the level of this could happen and that could happen, especially the doctors, because they would always come to you and say, well, you have this chance of this and this chance of that, and this could happen and that could happen. You should worry about this and you should worry about that. And in the beginning, it's a flood tide of ego being thrust at you by them, and they're talking to your ego being, because it's all about worry and the future and percentages and who this and that this, and this incredible tide of ego also becomes something that you just say, no, that's enough of that. And they come in and say, this could happen. Fine, okay, accept all that. But it's not happening now. And now is good. And we don't care about what you say, this and that, you should do this, you should do that. And when you would say to people, we're not doing that. We're doing this now. And it's not that you don't care, it's that you just accept that all these possibilities are true, but it's not happening today.
Well, okay. That's one aspect of it. But the truth of the matter is, when you're in there and the pressure is on you constantly, you don't get a break, okay? You barely have time to sleep, if you're lucky. My point being, once the ego had shut up, Okay, I refused to engage in any of it. I allowed my heart to open up and let that love that a mother has for their child, who they're basically telling you he's going to die, all right, unless we do this or that or this or that. You can see very easily how people want to cling to some kind of lifeline. But I already knew that this is beyond me. This is beyond me. I don't have an answer on how to save my child. I had to open up and fill with God's grace and let that love and compassion guide me every single moment. And I cannot describe for you what that felt like, because I should have fallen apart with all the crazy that was going on. But I didn't, because God's hand was on me all the way through. And regardless of every logical thought you might want to they give you, allowing that love for your child to guide you, grace came in and opened your mouth and used your lips to give a satisfactory answer to the demands that the doctor had given you on what decision are you making and how are you making this decision and why are you doing it, because they're ready. They're standing there ready to fight for what they feel is the appropriate answer on what should be done. And I had to rely on his grace, his hand on my heart to take the next step.
Well, and once you reach that point, it's the same. Not the same, but it is the other. It is another way to get exactly there. The ego is gone at that point.
There's no
ego.
Didn't matter.
Let's. I know this is wonderful. We'll come back and we'll talk more about suffering after the break. But that's exactly it. Once the ego is gone, you accept everything, and you can give those answers. Let's go back and take a little break, and we'll come back on the other side and talk more about the paradox of suffering.
Wait is over. First Blood, Book 2 of the Blood series is out. Your favorite bad boy thief Dev is back, and the beautiful and deadly Trey is right there with him. She is sharp, sexy, and full of surprises. Their adventures continue as a new power arises to threaten the world. The heart of creation is under attack, and time is definitely not on their side as they battle against their enemies' undead hordes. Can they unlock the hidden power that can defeat him, or will his forces draw first blood? Get all 3 installments in the series. Book 0, It's in the Blood. Book 1, Destroyer's Blood, and the new release, Book 2, First Blood, today. Available in ebook and paperback format on Amazon, Kobo, Apple, and most other fine e-tailers.
Moonstones and murder. Real murderers need a heart of stone. Meet Maggie and Mike Heartstone, parents of twin boys, entrepreneurs, and now empty nesters. Mike is retired, not by choice, from his position as chief of police in the picturesque resort town of Hamilton. And now his wife Maggie and her shop, the Cozy Crystal, are their only source of income when a mysterious killing interrupts Hamilton's famous Springfield Park rock show. The townsfolk, the Cozy Crystal, and their lives are rocked to the core. Can Mike and Maggie figure out who is behind the murderous deeds before the town comes crashing down around them? A touch of romance, a little mayhem. and a whole lot of suspense, along with plenty of comedy and thrills galore. Get your crystal magnifying glass out. It's time for some moonstones and murder. Available on Amazon, Apple, Kobo, and other fine e-tailers in ebook and paperback. Out soon on Audible. Get your copy today.
The Fat Man Gets Out of Bed is the latest book from Michael Lyons, the award-winning author of There is a Reaper. Featuring 13 original stories, this wide-ranging collection has everything. Forbidden love, gods versus demigods, weird invading aliens, sexy seductive artificial intelligence, and unusual passion between the living and the dead. All set amidst fantastic worlds of pain and loss and boundless joy. From the sublime to the macabre to the bittersweet, The Fat Man Gets Out of Bed will leave you breathless with laughter, brimming with tears, trembling with suspense. Available now on Amazon.com, Google Play, iTunes, Kobo, and fine e-tailers everywhere.
Rick Riordan fans, love mythology with plenty of action and humor? Destroyer's Blood is for you. The new fantasy novel by award-winning author Michael Lyons is book 1 of the adventures of Dev Kalian, the Blood series. Follow Dev and his magic sword Betrayer as they are suddenly attacked and forced to return to Olympus to fight in a war they want no part in. The world of men and gods is about to be destroyed by Zeus's ancient foe, and only Dev and Trey can stop him. The conflict never stops, and the amazing twist will have you on the edge of your seat. Act now while the ebook is on sale for only 99 cents. Destroyer's Blood is available on Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, iTunes, Kobo, and fine e-tailers everywhere. And while you're there, get the free prequel, It's in the Blood, available for a limited time.
There is a Reaper is the story of 5-year-old Christopher Aaron and his life-changing struggle with leukemia. Winner of both the Indie Bragg Medallion as well as the reader's favorite silver medal for memoir, There is a Reaper has more than 100 Amazon book reviews and a 5-star rating. It has been described as life-changing, spiritual, a must-read. Just released on Audible and iTunes, this memoir is also available in paperback and on Amazon Kindle for only 99 cents. Get your copy of this life-changing memoir today.
Hi, this is Hannah Ruth from the band Wild Hum. Check out our new Americana Soul CD, Wild Hum, at our website, wildhummusic.com. And you are listening to the ArtistFirst Radio Network. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on The Soul of the Everyman on the ArtistFirst Radio Network. Any listeners who can write down anything that was said during the second commercial on this break will win a Soul of the Everyman gift pack. Send them to dj@artistfirst.com. Back to your hosts, Michael and Margaret Lyons.
What's in the gift pack? We'll give them something. Thank you very much. And tonight we are talking about suffering, and if you suffered through that commercial, then you know what we're talking about. But we are talking, and I want to go back to Tolle's quote because I think we reached something very important here. In his quote that you read earlier, it's the second line. He says, "If you had not suffered as you have," and it's interesting there because as you have, because he knows everyone has, there would be no depth to you as a human being, no humility, no compassion, and that's exactly right. If you have not experienced suffering, you can't relate. Buddha, go back to Gautama again. One of the reasons that Buddha was so shocked to his very core is that he was raised in basically a bubble. He was raised in an artificial world in which there was no lack, no suffering, never any pain. He was astounded when he saw, I think, the beggar, the old beggar by the side of the road.
Old age, yeah. What is this? I've never seen a man in this condition before.
Exactly.
And it was old age.
From his point of view, people were eternally youthful. They always had everything they needed. They never suffered. And then he went into the, well, let's call it the real world. He was in an artificial environment, and his ego was shattered. He must have been a very sensitive and compassionate being, an enlightened being to start with. But in this moment of enlightenment, his ego was shattered. He lost the bubble, and in the bubble breaking, it broke up this illusion, and he saw below it. And initially, he was repulsed.
Oh, the last, there were 3 incidences, but the last one was death. And death has a tendency to shatter egos.
Yes. But the Buddha, in and of himself, he said, well, that's not me. I'm not Buddha. But every one of us is brought to this same exact place through our lives, because we, as Tolle says here, we all suffer, and without suffering, there's no depth to you. You're in a bubble. If you've never suffered a single day in your life, you will impress no one, because you'll be a shallow, vapid, disconnected, unable to relate individual. Maybe in specific instances that wouldn't necessarily always be true, but in general, what as Nietzsche says, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Well, that's sort of an egoic way of thinking about it, but whatever brings the ego to a silent point, and the first time you get to a silent ego point, you may be astounded, because you haven't ceased to exist. Your ego is shut up, and yet you're still there. And if you realize that this is almost like a breath of fresh air, and people go into it deeper and deeper, and at some point, through great suffering or through great insight, or both, you realize that the ego is just a very small part of you. It's and like Tolle says, it's a shell, right, Margaret? Because you birth yourself, your true self, by cracking this shell.
Yes. Well, the ego is the surface facade that you put up. But when you look at, I can speak for myself. Before we went through this with Christopher, I thought I was just, a nice person and pretty compassionate or sympathetic. I thought I had it bad. The babies aren't sleeping and da 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 da. All this other. I thought it was, that world where suddenly it's a life and death struggle. That's another world. That wasn't my world. And then suddenly you're thrust into it. And I can honestly say I am more compassionate now than I had ever been. And I realized that the broader picture of being in the moment, I thought you had to keep taking care of things, checklist, organizing things so things can happen for, you got a family of 4 boys. It's like you got to organize everything. But being in that situation where suddenly what was real was life and death, just that, first of all, just blew the ego away completely. And you're left with consciousness looking around going, well, okay, here I am. And you see a lot from that position, because people's motives become crystal clear to you when your ego is no longer involved. You know why a person is talking to you or not talking to you. You know that there are levels of discomfort for them, and who is being run by fear and who is not. People want to be sympathetic to you. They don't want to look like they're being
Cold.
yes. But at the same time, they're so afraid because that's their worst fear, that my child would be sick like that. Or my child may look like that, and you're trying to save his life and he looks like that. So you understood that there were reasons why they were talking to you the way they were, or they needed to end the conversation as quickly as possible.
Right.
But I didn't have enough energy to feed their egos. That's the point I'm trying to get at.
Mm-hmm.
You don't realize how much energy it actually takes to maintain your ego and to feed somebody else's ego. Because when someone's afraid and they're coming to you, and you know they're speaking to you in this way, trying to be sympathetic, because they're feeding their own ego. It's not that they're heartless. It's just that the fear is overriding their soul so much that they're squirming and they're trying to find a way to manage it. And they're unconscious of it all. They're unconscious of the fact that the person you're speaking with actually knows exactly the turmoil that you're going through right now. And there were people that I wound up speaking with and others that I don't have time for you. My baby needs this right now.
The point that you're making is exactly that when these people come to you, and this is not a knock, it's sympathy, not compassion. And there's a very big difference. We've had shows about this, and you can go back and listen to some of them. But the essential difference is sympathy is looking to take something from you. Sympathy wants acknowledgement. Sympathy wants to say, "Oh, you're so wonderful that you came and that you brought this and another." And I don't know what I get. Sympathy wants to be acknowledged and it wants to be public. It's very much like those who give alms in public. Those who show how sympathetic and how wonderful they are. They're very, very showy about their sympathy. Big Hallmark cards. The compassionate never need to be acknowledged. The compassionate come to you in silence. And the first thing they say, and this is remarkable, is when people would come to you in compassion, they would say, "I have no idea what you're going through. I just had to be here. Just to be here." And their hearts are open. You can see that instantly when your ego is no longer involved. When you, as you say, they come to you with this sympathetic, and this is not a bad thing. This is somebody who's really trying to do good. But the ego is driving it, and fear. And when they come, what they're really looking for you is for you to make them feel better.
Yeah.
Which is the amazing thing. You're the one in hell. You're the one burning. And they're coming to you so that you can make them feel better. Why? Because they feel bad. They really feel bad. It makes them uncomfortable and afraid, and it's their worst fear, and they really want to just touch very quickly and make themselves feel better. Oh, I was there today, and I brought them a sandwich, and I did a good job, and then I'm gonna write, and I'll come back. Oh, I'll come back in a month or so and check in on them. And what we knew is that the now meant that the month from now didn't even matter. We never even counted it. The month from now meant nothing. The now, the only thing you knew about now is that maybe you had the next now, meaning the next moment from now. And a month from now meant nothing. But I don't want to give you the impression that somebody who would come in sympathy and want to do a good deed, yes, but it's like a little child that comes up to this situation. They have a blade of grass and a dandelion. They say, "I brought you something," and you're like, "Oh, thank you, honey," But they're not there to help. They're just there because they're children and they want to come by and they want to say something and be there, and so sometimes you just don't have the energy to entertain that, and you just have to say, well, thank you, but I have something to do right now. You excuse yourself. Maybe you don't make them feel bad about it, but you just don't have the moment to make them feel better. You don't have the moment to feed their ego. You don't have anything left to feed them with. And sometimes they'll get mad. Why did I came there and she didn't do this and she did. And you got that sometimes from people.
Oh, yeah.
They would come to help and they'd walk away. Well, I don't know why she's so mean. I don't know, maybe because she doesn't feel it. And they're trying to tell themselves a story about why you're so mean. Meanwhile,
It's the old, I'm here to help you. I'm like, leave.
but that was it. Christopher would do it too. They would come in and they say, "We're here to help you," and he'd be like, "I don't need you."
The door's there.
There. He would turn the volume up on the TV while they were trying to talk to him. He's like, "I don't need you for this. I don't need anything for you." Boo, 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 boo. Christopher, I need your attention. No, boo, boo, boo. It's louder and louder. And because in that moment, you could see, as you said just a moment ago, see their motives. You know that they're not there really for you. They're really there for themselves.
No. They were given a task that it just needed to be done. The classic, of course, is that we were in a teaching hospital. That's what Memorial Sloan Kettering is a teaching hospital. So you have your doctors, and they are assigned a group of, they're not residents, they're studying at the hospital.
Interns, I guess.
They're doctors. They're real doctors, but they're specializing in pediatrics, pediatric oncology. So they have at least 5. We always call them mother duck and 5 ducklings because that's exactly what it would look like. You would have the doctor leading and 5 coming behind them, and all of them are nodding their heads. It was just this continual head nod, head bob thing going on. And it was always at the end of the month, and we all looked at each other going, okay, are you ready? This is the new batch. And they would come in, and they're doing all this, and some of them are genuinely excited about doing this. And some of them, their egos are like, I'm surprised they can get through the door because, I'm this spectacular doctor. I had one woman. I know she meant well, but man, she was young. She decided, okay, pediatrics. I love children. I'm here to help all these moms and dads. And we had just gotten through one of these awful sessions, and we were tired. And she comes in like super bubbly going, I'm your doctor. And we looked at her going, are you part of the transplant team? Like, no. Oh? We're under Dr. Kelly's, and who's the guy who's in charge of the whole transplant department. Like, I was like, well, and I'm looking at her like, well, who are you? Who are you? It was very, like, let's get cut to the chase here. I'm not here to feed your ego.
Right.
And so that's exactly, I'm part of, I forgot which doctor she was assigned to, but it happened to be that particular part of the wing because everybody had their own little turf that they were in charge of.
Mm.
So it was fascinating because the resident was on board with what we were doing. He'd been there for a while, Dr. Levine. Anyway, he understood.
Well,
and so
yes.
you could talk. This is when you knew that they were more interested in what's happening to your child right now, their patient. What would be the best thing at this point? Not, hello, here I am.
Mm-hmm.
I'm your doctor.
Aren't I wonderful? No, you're not so wonderful.
Like, no. And I do remember one time asking for, okay, I need the doctor right now because it was an issue that was going on with Chris. I need a doctor right now. and they sent her in. Like, oh yes, can I help you with this? Like, I looked at her and said, I want Dr. Levine. She's like, oh, but I'm.
Well, and it wasn't that she's not well-meaning, but it was all about her ego. Exactly.
I didn't have enough energy to have to stroke her ego. Okay, so she went off in a huff, and then when she came back, she said, Dr. Levine said to do exactly anything that you had asked, just do it. I said, okay, good. This. Boom.
Right.
Done. I was only concerned about, no ego, no nothing. I need this. Because he had gone through a session in his life. He needed things.
Well, at the end of the day, when you take the ego out of it, the moment of now requires, Totally says this too, and it's very, very true. In the moment of now, you don't just accept. You accept that the moment of now is here. And then you say, is there anything I can do? Can I make a decision? Is there something that needs to be done with my own consciousness? And you were there. You were like, okay, in this moment of now, I don't need bubbly. I don't need to feed your ego. I need this and this and this and this. And to the extent that somebody thwarts that, they become unnecessary. They become dross in the moment of now. He's like, now you're no longer an active participant. You're an ego. You're part of the fog that is in the moment of now.
Right.
And the fog in the moment of now, you cut right through it. If you're in that moment, if you're in consciousness, you just say, okay, I know why you're here. I know you're here for me to join in your ego fog, in your story. But in this moment, I can't play story. I can't play your game. I can't play this game. I need this, and this. If you could get them yourself, if you go sign out the meds or do the thing or do the procedure,
I would have done it.
You would do it. But you don't have that skill, or they won't let you do it. So you say to this other being, in a being state, this is the situation. I've decided that we need this. The greater I, the actual consciousness I, says this needs to be done. I need you to do it. Bring yourself into the reality of now and realize that without any ego, it just needs to be done. This is the moment to do this thing. And if she was able to let her own ego go, it would have been, I don't care, that you're not treating me with all the bubbles and telling me I'm so wonderful. Oh, I am here. I have hands. I have the ability. My hands are yours. I will bring you what you need. Blah, blah, blah. Instead, she had to go and have her ego crushed a little bit by Dr. Whomever and sit back with her tail between her legs to say, okay, I'll do whatever you want. Well, we didn't want any of those things. That was just a waste of time.
It didn't matter to me. You just added a couple steps in there. We need this done now. And I guess
it's the moment of now. Well, and again, the essential paradox of suffering is that you go through it, it cracks your ego, and then it's unnecessary. You reach the other side of that, and there's no longer any suffering. There's no longer any ego. It just is. And we have reached the moment of is, that is the end of the suffering of this show. So,
and all you have suffered all the way through.
All the way through. So I'm Michael Lyon.
And I'm Margaret. And thank you for listening.